We are so delighted to be able to share this day with you and to share this presentation. Susan and I have been looking forward to this for quite a while, and we hope that as the triple header, as I like to call it, begins to get closer and closer of Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, and they come kind of garbed in all kinds of tradition and with history, that as that comes closer, if you are grieving or you know someone who is grieving, that this presentation on tips to tackle the holidays will be very helpful for you. One of the things I think it's necessary to say and get right ahead of us is to say that, holidays are tough. They are tough normally, but now they're really tough because of the death of someone else, and you're anticipating the holidays. I remember very well, my father died and my mother survived him by about 10 years. And in April or May already, she was always asking the boys, well, where am I going to be on Thanksgiving? She was very concerned about that. She died after 10 years. And since that time, two of my brothers have died. So I've experienced death and all the associations that goes with that. But probably the hardest thing that I had to experience as far as death is concerned was 28 years of a marriage to my first wife, and she died of cancer. And so we've been through spousal grief and all other kinds of grief. And one of the things that we want you to know is that we're here to help. We want to give you hope. We want to give you purpose. We want to give you some hints. I happen to be a pastor and a seminary prof. But Susan and I have been doing a lot of work together, and she'll explain who she is in just a second, in terms of death and bereavement. And we're just delighted to be here today with you, and we hope that it's going to be helpful.
I'm going to join in. I don't know if you've ever said your name.
Oh, my name is Bob.
Yeah, Bob DeVries.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, okay.
And I didn't hear it at least.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. I am also delighted to be with you today. I know that Bob used the word holidays are tough. As a psychologist and an RN, I like to reframe things a lot. And sometimes the way that we think about things is very important. So I would like the word challenging. Holidays are extremely challenging. They can be even without a death, but when somebody that we love dies, it really hurts. Anyway, a little bit more about me. I used to teach nursing at a couple of nursing schools and went on and got my doctoral degree in psychology. And so I'm a licensed psychologist. I have a clinical practice here in Georgia. Right now it's online. So I see people from all over the country as long as the state gives reciprocity and allows me as a licensed psychologist to see people in their state. But I love doing therapy because I hold hope, like Bob was talking about, for everybody, that people can get through really difficult and challenging things and come out better for the wear. So we hope that's true as we talk about tips to tackle the holidays and special occasions, which you're going to have on your grief journey. They just pop up in every calendar year, whether we want them to or not. But rather than leaving grief and amorphous, we want to talk a little bit about what that all involves. I did therapy long before I had really, really significant deaths, but it changed me because it gave me that personal, not just the professional view, but also the personal view about having to walk through that valley of the shadow of death. And so I think that it's important. After I was widowed midlife, my first husband had a malignant brain tumor for 18 years. Both of my parents died within the last 12 years. My dad just 2 years ago, and both of them lived with us. My dad outlived my mom, and he died after living with us 11 years. So Bob and I were both very close and very connected to them. One thing Bob also didn't tell you is that we are authors, and we wrote a book just because we met by colleagues, and it was on being widowed because Bob also is widowed. And we met midlife because colleagues thought, we might be able to do some writing together. And sure enough, even though I had never planned that. We wrote a book together called Getting to the Other Side of Grief. And God had a hand in it because it was published pretty quickly. And from that, other books have come, and we are now married. Bob's line is, if you can wallpaper together, why not date and see if it would work for marriage? So we are now married together, and we speak around the country.
And,
so
it's worked for 24 years so far. We have our 25th
is.
wedding anniversary coming up next year.
So at any rate, we just hope that what we have to say today comes with certainly personal experience and professional. We do a lot of speaking. We do a lot of leading of grief groups, and we're also on Grief Share. So we want to just give you our take on what is grief, just some of the factors, because we could talk all day about what is grief. But just a few things that we want you to make sure you understand the platform that we're coming from. And the first one is that whenever there's a loss, people grieve. It just triggers grief. It's a universal thing. It happens all over the world. And it's an automatic thing. We don't ask to grieve. But you know why we grieve? We grieve because we were attached to the person who died, because we loved that person. And as C.S. Lewis said, I don't know how many of you have read A Grief Observed, but it's a very good book where he says, the only way to avoid pain is never to love. And just think about the relationship that you're on this Zoom call with, so that you understand that, yeah, you undoubtedly loved that person. You were connected to that person. You interwove your life with that person, because we don't just grieve for the person. We grieve for the lifestyle, for the life, all the ways that person affected us and came into our life and hopefully made it richer and enhanced it. You know, the other interesting thing is often we'll say, oh, I wish he or she could be here for that. And that's understandable. It almost sounds like we're grieving and we feel sad that where they are now, you'd like them to come back. But I think it's been helpful for me to realize that if we're coming from a religious Christian perspective, or we believe in an afterlife, then where the person is that died is probably all set. They probably would not want to come back, because it was where they are now is much preferable probably to this world, as wonderful as you all maybe were as a family. But I think that we grieve for ourselves because we miss that person, because we want that person to be able to see what's happened if it's something that was a struggle or that you both had been working on, or as a family. So remember that we're grieving because the other person's all set, but we're in pieces, that we're torn apart. We've got a huge hole if that person was very significant to us in our life. So when we grieve, we're paying tribute. We're saying, you were so important that I feel awful that now you're not here. And, you know, grief is multifaceted. It controls all of the components of our body, physically, cognitively, behaviorally, spiritually, and emotionally. Sometimes we just think it's more emotional, but it really is all those components. We often talk about grief as a journey, and I think it's a good analogy. It's definitely something that has a beginning when the person dies, sometimes even somewhat earlier with anticipatory grief, but it also has an end point. And Bob and I want you to know that we don't believe that a person grieves forever. We believe that you can work through some things, and that at the end of that, you can come out saying, I'm grateful. So it's a way to change the hurt into gratitude for that person being in your life. If we look at it as a journey, then I think that for us anyway, I think we kind of came up with, what about thinking of that journey as you're on the main road, you're traveling, everything's going okay, maybe it's going wonderful, and all of a sudden that person dies, or maybe that person all of a sudden starts to become ill. it's kind of like you're forced on a detour. And I don't know if you're like me, but when I'm driving along and trying to make good time and everything's going really well, and I'm going to make my destination at the point that I thought I would, and then I see detour sign flashing up, I'm going like, oh no, there's going to be a detour. And there's no way else to go but on that detour. And you don't know when it's going to end. You don't know what little towns it's going to go through or what kind of situations, hilly or whatever, that's going to slow you down. Might be a two tracker. And so I don't mean two tracker dirt, I mean two tracker, two lanes, but you can't pass very well. And that's really a good analogy for me of what grief is. You don't know exactly when it's going to end. You don't know what exactly you're going to have to go through. And you just know that you don't have any choice but to do it. And so I think that, we want you to think that it is kind of like a detour, but it's also a process. It takes time. No one can rush grief. It takes, we would say, a minimum of a year. I remember there was this man who came up to us after we spoke, and I don't even know what state we were in. And he said, I did everything in the book. Traveling Through Grief was a book that we wrote and is still in print, obviously. But it was about the things that we think are helpful to do on your grief journey. And he said, I did all of them and I don't feel any better. And so finally I thought maybe I should say, who are you grieving and how long ago? And he said, my wife died 3 months ago. And I'm like, it takes time and work. You can't just do the work. You have to give it time because of all the seasons, because of all the holidays that we're going to talk about today. All of those things have to occur, and we need time and doing some things and experiencing some things to get through it.
And you're talking about this guy who was a consultant to businesses as an efficiency expert.
That's the funny part of it, that for us, it was like, hey, I'm an efficiency expert. That's my specialty. I go around the country doing that. I said, well, you can't use those skills right with grief, because patience and going through the pain is what heals. And that's the other interesting thing, is that facing things is what helps you get to the other side of grief. One other thought I want to leave with you about, besides grief being active and intentional, is to say that if we look at our life, and some of you are grieving the death of a spouse, where or some a parent, some other relationships within that family. The interesting thing is, one person dies and that whole family system grieves different things, but they grieve. But if we can look at our lifeline, we're born, and then people come into our lives. And if it's a spouse, it definitely comes into your life. If it's a parent, that person's been there from the beginning. But if we often say it's my husband or my wife or my mom or my dad, like we own that person. And it's not really true that we own this person. We aren't guaranteed how long the person's going to be in our life, because we know it's a truism that we as humans all die. And so if you can maybe change your whole way of thinking about people in your life and look at them as on loan, as gifts to you, as put in your life, if you're coming from a religious, spiritual perspective, as put in your life for reasons. And that when they die, yes, it hurts like ever, but eventually our hope is that you will become very grateful for having them and what you learned from them and how they rubbed off on you. One other thing I want to leave with you about grief, and that is, you may be familiar with Kubler-Ross. And I mean, she did a lot as a researcher and a clinician about studying people and people's behavior. But it's been interpreted by society that she was studying grieving people, when actually she was more accurately doing work with dying people. And so the stages of grief that you've probably heard about, shock, numbness, anger, bargaining, acceptance, some of those are very true, that those are experiences when a loved one dies. But she was describing behavior really of people who knew they had a terminal illness and were facing their own death. And and so it's really important that you also see that many grief experts, I mean, I don't know if we'd call ourselves experts, but we certainly do speak and write. We would say that being descriptive isn't as healthy as using our professional knowledge and saying, from all the people that we've seen and all the research that we've done, there are things that people need to do to get through their grief journey. And a lot of clinicians have put those into goals of grief. And we've kind of taken everybody's goals of grief and come up with 5 of our own that we're going to talk a little bit about. But if you want to know more about those, I don't want to give this an advertising perspective, but we would like you to take a look at The Empty Chair and Traveling Through Grief. Empty Chair's about holidays, and Traveling Through Grief is just about the whole journey that any family member would have to go through. Because it talks about the 3 goals that definitely have to do with a loved one's death, and that is accepting the reality of a loved one's death, and dealing with all the emotions. If you look at that, all of us have like an emotional receptacle or a bottle inside. And if we're not getting out emotions, we're putting them in and we're stuffing them and they go up to the neck of the bottle. And then we have to pay tribute and summarize and touch and do a whole lot of hard things to recall memories and to memorize those about our loved one. And then to be able to eventually put that relationship in the past, not to ever forget, but to be able to reframe. So we're not always looking and living in the past, that we're saying, because we can't do both. It's kind of like a little toddler trying to learn to walk. He or she can't always hang on to furniture. You have to let go in order to move forward. And eventually that same thing is true for grieving people. So then the other 2 goals are really about you as the griever. You have to figure out, who am I now without that person in my life? It's kind of reconstructing your identity without that significant person. And then, why am I here? I didn't die. My loved one did, but I'm here for some reasons and purposes yet. And it's a process again. It takes time and work, both of those things, to be able to get to the other side of grief, which we hope for all of you that is your outcome as well. So I guess that now, I think, at least, I don't know, can you think of anything else to add to that whole thing?
Well, I think you were able to condense a 3-hour presentation
I
into
tried.
about 15
I know
minutes,
I sounded like a train, but at
really
any
good.
rate, we want you to know that grief is hard, but it's manageable. It's challenging, and it's so growth producing. I would say grief will make a new person out of you. If it doesn't kill you in the making, was what somebody else added. But we do grow through loss. And even during the holidays, we can use those to grow.
And that's the important word now, because we're talking about holidays in grief. You've now got a kind of an overview of what grief really looks like. But when the holidays come, it really takes on a whole different configuration. My wife died in mid-October, and I had a big grief brain. I mean, I like to cook, I like to entertain. I thought, well, why not? I can still do this. So I would have our friends over for a dinner for Thanksgiving. Crazy idea when you're grieving the death of a 28-year-old anniversary wife. But I got all the tables set, sat down, got the food out and everything else. And all of a sudden I realized that the chair next to me was empty. And I had the audacity, or the craziness, to say, who's missing? That's grief brain. That is to say, you go through these things, and especially holidays that have so many traditions and so many other expectations, and especially if you're early in your grief, when you're normally all together, you're not all together any longer. There's that empty chair. And that's where the title of that book came from. So it's blatantly painful to see that role and all those roles that that deceased played that's not in place any longer. You know? There are roles that are experienced, if it's a spouse, for example, if there are roles that are experienced by the spouse, I mean, those are not there. No longer having a soulmate or a kindred spirit, or no longer the best friend, or emotional and spiritual intimacy and that sort of thing.
Or I like to think of it as a 24/7
24,
relationship.
yeah, exactly.
You at least touch base a lot in 24 hours. And the other thing I think about spousal relationships is there's the sense of we're in this together. I don't have to do solo. I can make decisions and everything together.
But the other thing that I like to point out is that when a spouse dies and leaves a surviving spouse, that's not the only person who's grieving. There are a lot of other people typically within the family, especially children or siblings or parents, but especially children, whether they're young children living at home yet or they're adult children who are out and established on their own. They also are grieving, but they're grieving for different roles. That is to say, that parent may have been the encourager or the wise person to go see for advice and that sort of thing. Maybe that was the one that conditioned, supported you unconditionally or gave a historical perspective. But the point is that when a person in a family dies, there are all kinds of people. Most research says that between 6 to 9 other people have been significantly affected by the death of a person, most of whom are in the family or the extended family. And I think it's important to remember that when the holidays come, that really gets exacerbated, because now it's not just the fact that a person died and those particular generic roles are gone, but who's going to carve the turkey? Who's going to plan the games for Christmas or whatever else goes on within the normal traditions? Susan and I always had a tradition with her parents that we would walk through the downtown of this little town where they lived on Thanksgiving afternoon. And it was wonderful, but it was a tradition. You just had to do it. And after Dad died and Mom died, what do we do? That becomes a grief trigger for us, saying, are we going to go walk through the downtown yet? So one of the things I think it's very important is to remember that what happens is that the dynamics of families change. And so we've already talked about the fact that the family is grieving and it leaves an empty chair, but there are all kinds of traditions that used to have meaning in them and now they're painful and they're hollow. The celebrations become muted. I kind of like to say it's sort of like putting the COVID mask on and trying to talk through it. I mean, it's the holiday celebration that doesn't express itself as fully and as enthusiastically as it normally would. And food, I really have to put food in here because especially around holidays, food can be a real grief trigger because that may be the time where Mom prepared this particular dish. Maybe it was sweet apple pie or something like that. But the fact of the matter is it's not there. That becomes a food trigger. There's also worship and spiritual rituals, regardless of what kind of religion you might be in, but we're going to be pushed into re-examining deeper meaning, and I'll say more about that later on. But the memories of how we were and what he or she contributed to our life are now absent. And the one good thing that can happen with that is that it will trigger storytelling. It will help kind of reminisce and bring back some of the things, well, this is what Dad used to do, or our son used to do, or mother used to do. And we'll kind of rebuild those memories in that regard.
Yeah, I think that, all those things, the roles that we play and this whole family, grief is an interesting thing because in a lot of ways, it's my grief. And it can become kind of self-focused. And in a sense, that's true. It is your grief. And I don't know if you figured this out yet, but I used to think that people could help me get through. People can encourage, but really it's a walk that you have to take solo, and it can be kind of a lonely journey. And that's where having some spirituality,
Right.
some beliefs also is helpful. But it also is one person dies and the whole family grieves. And as you were
Mhm.
talking about roles that change, just even personally, but also in a lot of people that I work with, if you're an adult child or even a young child or a youth, teenage age or young adult, um, it may seem when one of your parents dies that there's not that solid parental wall or a connection, or you don't have anything solid to push against if you want to rebel or argue, or even from a caretaking. It's kind of like when we're married and it's a good relationship, we kind of caretake each other. We're kind of helping each other out and supporting each other. And when that support's gone, sometimes the other parent feels very fragile. And that may be the case, especially when that person is going through grief.
Right.
If both of your parents now have died, this whole term called orphan, it may feel like I don't have any protection if we erroneously think people die in some chronological order. But you also don't have all those things that Bob was talking about characteristics of what
Mhm.
parents, if they're healthy, can offer in a family situation. So it can be a very different kind of situation as you're approaching the holidays. Sometimes we also think that all families are healthy, and that simply is not true. I mean, I
Right.
I see a lot of families in my practice that are not healthy, and if there's conflict and somebody dies, if there's um, estrangement, maybe some members of the family haven't gathered, maybe they didn't come to the funeral, or maybe they did, but maybe they really didn't take part or have much conversation with other family members. So it's we sometimes think that families are this wonderful group, like this is going to age me, but Leave It to Beaver, or one of those really nice like Donna Reed show where everybody is so um, kind and considerate and such a close family, but that's simply not life. So that also can complicate grief and can prolong grief. So let's talk about what you maybe need to think about and put in your toolbox, and that will help. Because if you can keep these ideas, we're going to call them tips to tackle the holidays. But I'd like to have us be able to give you some tools that are really going to help you to use the holidays in a way that we at least would encourage you to think as of healthy. You know, a lot of people say to us, I just want it to be January 2. As the calendar turns to November, we start to hear more of that from our grief groups that we do here in Atlanta, where it's like, yeah, I wish we could just skip November and December and end up January 2 after the new year.
You want to be Rip Van Winkle and go to sleep and not have to wake up until the new year has come in. So,
But each of the holidays have their own challenges. And obviously, we can't do that. It is very true that our hallmark ideal of happy holidays is not going to happen this year when we're grieving the death of a loved one, just not. But I think we could even challenge, is this ever always so wonderfully sentimental and great, or is there sometimes tension and difficulty also in the holidays? I think, nothing is perfect in this world. So I'm not sure any family is really perfect, but it's certainly going to put a damper on holidays when a person is grieving, because you are paying tribute to the fact that, just like I was talking about earlier, where grieving is a tribute, it's an honor. It's saying you made a difference in my life. And the fact that you're not here is definitely a negative for me. I loved having you in my life. And the whole family maybe will feel, or most of the family will feel that same way. So, I think that we have to remember that grieving and holidays, at least our picture of what holidays should be, is kind of an oxymoron. They're opposite. They're like mixing oil and water together, just don't mix very well. But you do have to go through them. There's no getting around them, and that's the other thing about grief. If you happen to know Psalm 23, it says it so well. Yea, though I walk through the valley. It doesn't mean over, under, around. It means through. And, so it's at least encouraging that it's not a dead end or a cul-de-sac, that you can get through grief. You can do holidays by getting out of Dodge. That some people do that. They like, I can't face this. I can't handle it. They pick their most favorite holiday and say, I don't want to be here. I don't want to do any of the normal things. And, if that's really what you think is going to help you survive, then if you do that, okay, but know that the next year it's going to come back again. Now, maybe you'll be a little bit more able to deal with it. But, the thing is that we don't leave our grief. We don't take, we take that with us. It's not like I'm going to leave my grief at home and I'm just going to go out and try to forget that this ever happened. That's really not possible, because it's kind of like we play this monotone all the time when we're grieving. Like, my loved one died, my loved one died, my loved one died. And that's part of why we can't concentrate or remember what people said very well, because like Bob says, we have grief brain, but we're also playing that monotone, kind of like a subliminal message. Like, we're always aware of it for quite a while, that life isn't normal. This person died. And I feel awful physically and all the other ways that I mentioned.
But isn't that why holidays sometimes, the anticipation is usually worse than the actual event?
Oh yeah, that's very true. That is definitely true.
We build these things up in our minds so much. And we also forget, I think, that holidays, even under normal circumstances, are very exhausting and stressful for some families. So it's not that we're going from this pristine, perfect situation to something terrible. But it's what we make up in our minds and what we tell ourselves. That's the thing that we have to challenge.
Exactly. It's kind of like, even, sometimes writing a paper or taking a test. We think it's going to be really hard, and then we're pleasantly surprised. So hopefully, if you prepare, and that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about, is thinking about it ahead, not just letting it come up on you. You've probably heard about grief bursts or blindsidedness, and that happens with grief, where you think, oh, today might be a pretty good day. It started out okay, and then you hear a song or somebody says something to you and you crash and go like, oh, this is not going to be like I was hoping. And that's the same thing for holidays. If you can think through them before they actually occur, you will be doing a better job of being prepared. The third, if you are following our outline, I meant to say to you that, you see it on the screen, but hopefully you'll also have access to your own copy. But the third one talks about work at being congruent with yourself and others. People are very helpful, and sometimes too helpful, in giving advice. And some of the advice is not very accurate when it comes to grieving. And the main reason, I think, is because they don't like to see the people that they care about, in pain, their friends, their other family members. And so they want to try to help us get over it, or distract, or keep busy, or all of those kinds of things.
All because they want to fix it for you.
Yeah, they don't like to think that you're in pain. And they also don't like to identify with, this could be me. I'm this person's age. This could be me going through this. They don't like that. They don't like to we live in a very death-defying society. And that's not healthy, but nonetheless, that's pretty much reality. Congruence is one of my very favorite words. And if you don't hear anything else, hear this, that being congruent is a gift to your own self. And it's a gift because it doesn't mess you up. If it's like honesty, integrity, those are words that fit under congruence. So it's like speaking up for yourself too. It's being able to be assertive, not mean or nasty about it, appreciative, but very much defining your own self. So if somebody says, I think we ought to have a dinner just like we always had it for Christmas, and you're like, I'm not so sure about that. I have to think about that. And you say, well, okay, rather than, let me give that some thought. I really don't know if I'm going to be up for that. Then what you're thinking is, I'm hesitant. I'm feeling uneasy about that. So then I can't say, okay, fine, no problem. I'll just go right with it. Then it's congruent to say, I'm not so sure that I'm ready for that. I'm not so sure that's going to fly for me. Let me think about it and I'll get back with you. So that's some congruence is just healthy, no matter if it's holidays or anytime. It's like not conflicting yourself, not behaving or pretending that you're feeling better. Even generally, I mean, how many times do people that are grieving get asked, so how are you? And rather than saying, boy, this is the toughest thing I've ever had to do, or this today started good but fell on its face, they'll be like, okay, I'm okay. And then what that does, just so you know, is most people just check you off the list. So bear that in mind, like, oh, they're doing fine. I don't have to be empathetic or come alongside or help them out much because they're doing great.
The other thing that I think you need to hear what Susan is saying, because she's the psychologist, but we don't normally think in some of those terms. Basically, what she's also saying is that if you're being congruent, you're not talking about that other person. You're not even talking about what that other person really is saying. You're not going to argue with that person. It's not a you situation. It's a me situation. This is how I feel. This is how I think. But especially, this is how I feel. Because nobody can argue with your feelings. Nobody can say, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. I mean, we say that, but that's wrong. You just can't argue with my feeling. If I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling sad. Then you can ask me, why am I feeling sad on this Thanksgiving Day? And I could maybe answer that. But you can't judge it. And being congruent means that I will express what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking in an authentic way.
Right. And it's a nice lead into number 4, which is to implement self-care. And that holidays, number 5 too, holidays can be very emotional. You notice as not really a joke, but we like the acronym DEAR to think about all the time when you're grieving. It's kind of like flying in an airplane, and maybe you haven't done any of that since COVID. We certainly haven't yet, but we're getting ready to maybe think about it. But at any rate, I think that it's like the flight attendant will say, if you're traveling with a young child, please put your own oxygen on first and then that of your child, so that you can think straight and function enough to put it on your child and yourself both. The same thing for grieving. You've got to do self-care. You've got to first think about, this is going to be a rough period. I need to really do intentional good self-care. So the acronym DEAR, we really like to drink, and we put water there because you can drink other kinds of beverages, just not very many alcoholic, because we don't want to give you the idea that that's a way to do self-care. And substances, obviously, poor use, misuse are not healthy. But to keep yourself hydrated, to eat, to exercise, and to rest. And if you're having problems with any of those, then you really need to go and talk with your primary care about that. If you're not motivated, if you can't eat, and if you can't sleep, you're waking up all the time or you can't get to sleep, It's normal the first couple months, but then you have to be able to function. So um, a good physical is also an excellent idea after a loved one dies. And if you're caregiving before, even more so, because typically the focus is on the person who is ill, not on you as the caregiver. So do good self-care. Be prepared that holidays can be very emotional. I mean, they are triggers. They warm our hearts when things are good and, make us smile. Well, when things are not the way we want them, and you get all these triggers happening, like, well, my loved one always did that. Now he or she's not here. Maybe it just kind of comes up on you. It can be a real grief burst. It can be really, really hard. Make sure that you practice talking about, I feel this way. And if somebody is trying to do the should thing, like Bob was talking about, just say, well, these are my feelings. I'm not saying they're yours. They're mine. And just know feelings are never right or wrong. They always are. They always are. They can't be judged. So that's why it's good to talk about your feelings, because they can be yours and no one can take them away from you.
Let me underscore that one, because, Susan and I talk about goals of grief, and she's already spoken about that a little bit. But this one is so important. It is one of the goals. That is to say, when a loved one has died, one of the goals is to make certain that you are able to express all of the emotions that are associated with the death of that loved one. And I want to quickly add as well that emotions aren't all negative, even in a grief situation.
They aren't all positive,
They're
though,
not
either.
all positive either. Maybe more negative. But people often will say, I feel guilty. Well, why do you feel guilty? Well, because it was been so long that I took care of my husband or my wife or my child that now I kind of feel relief, and I shouldn't feel relieved that my person died. That's a real emotion, but it's a legitimate one. But those can become part of your grief journey, a very important part.
And we really are advocates of journaling. So it's a very good thing to start, maybe write a letter about the things I'm going to miss about not having you here for this Christmas, or this Thanksgiving, or this New Year's. I'm going to start a new year without you. So the more you can journal and really be aware of your feelings, the healthier will be your grief journey through, I think. The next one is to discuss your thoughts and feelings and talk with your family about how you're going to do the holidays, each one individually. And think of so, but what it has to start with is you thinking yourself about, so how did I spend this holiday? Or if it's a spouse who died, how did we spend this holiday? And write about it. And what parts did you really like? And what are you going to really miss about the fact that your spouse isn't here? Same way with parent. What did you like doing with your parents and your family, total, or however you gathered? And what do you think would be one or two things that you definitely, that are tradition, that we always do it this way? There's a lot of that in families. Those are called traditions. We always do it that way, which are fine, which are good. They're kind of uniting factors. But what ones are really, really near and dear that you want to keep? And once you figure out what you think your aptitude for handling the holidays is, how much you can be involved, then kind of ask your family to do the same and to come together and talk about it. So if you can remember the C's that kind of go with this, to choose yourself about what you think you can handle, to communicate that together as a family, and to compromise some, and then also to be congruent, maybe 4 C's.
I think that's
so.
right.
So you're able to say, I understand this is important to you. I'm not sure I can do that, but I'll hold it loosely. Grieving people hold a lot loosely, and that's fine. I'm not sure how I'm going to feel that day. I'm not sure how much I can take. So I'd like to just play it by ear. I like that expression, play it by ear. So if you live alone, if you were in a spousal relationship and your spouse died, one of my cardinal rules became drive yourself, Susan. Always have your own vehicle. So if you need a quick exit, you can just say, I'm going for a walk, or I need to go home for a bit. Maybe I'll come back for dessert, or maybe I'll be able to get up for this. That kind of freedom to take care of yourself too. You heard journaling. Number 7 also has to do with journaling about memories, about what was significant, what was very, very important to you in the relationship with whoever the person was who died, whatever role relationship the person was who died to you. Hard to face. People want you to get back to your old self. Friends and family and an extended family, they want to see you back and laughing and having fun and whatever. But I think what everybody in that family has to realize is that things will never be quite the same. The old normal can't be. And again, in some ways, that pays tribute to the person who died. This person contributed to our family, and now this person's missing. This person's not really missing. This person died. And so it's not going to be quite the same. We have to kind of figure out a new normal.
And I think it's also very important to realize that this quote, old normal, is a myth. It's a fallacy. There isn't a standard old normal that you had. Your children grow up and they leave the house. All right. Now you may say that's normal, but it certainly is not the lifestyle.
And holidays change as they're doing that.
And holidays change as they're doing that. That is to say, what used to be becomes normal only because you have a little better idea of what's going to be happening. Whereas when you look into the future, it's totally blank. You have no idea what to do and where it's going to go. But just don't think that, well, I can return to the same thing and I'm going to go back to all the same activities that I've had, because they probably wouldn't have gone back to all of them anyway. And, because you change and you become interested in something else.
But the other interesting thing is that if you look at what the next number 13, I have to go back to 8, number 8. What number 8 is, as you talk about things in the family, to what's important to people, what about also looking at the opposite? What did we do in holidays gone by that we really didn't like, or that we'd like to mix up a bit or change in some ways? That's interesting too. Oh, I never liked this kind of stuffing, or, oh, we don't have to have cranberries this year for me. Those kinds of things. Or, let's not do a main dinner, let's do brunch, or let's do, it's also an opportunity for a family system to gel together again in a new way. It's a way to kind of reevaluate. Mm-hmm. Well, while we have to reconstruct, because I think grieving is like Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Humpty Dumpty's in parts, and all these pieces have to be put back together again. And for me, that works in a family system. So now, everything has changed with this one person's death, that we now are having all over to kind of reconstruct. How are we going to not lose all the pieces of it, but what else are we going to add or change, or say that was good for that time, but let's not continue to do that kind of thing. So it's a good time to really be honest with congruence and to figure out together as a family system how you want to just try maybe a few new things, as well as some things that are valuable to you in the past. And it may be that some of those things you're going to choose to do before the holidays solo. My first husband and I always went to a concert at a college in the town that we were in. And actually I went to for a while before I went into nursing. And it was just a beautiful concert, though, with many of the orchestra and the different choirs in the college. And So I decided I was not going to invite anybody else to go with me, that was something that was so special that I wanted to do solo. And that was a good example of when I said face the pain heals. I call
Mhm.
it putting your hand on the burner. You know it's going to hurt. You don't want to do it. You want to avoid it. Oh, I don't want to have to go through this. But it makes every time we avoid something, it makes our world get smaller. It really does. And after a while, I can't go here. I don't want to do that. It's going to hurt too much. It's like giving that other thing that you're avoiding more power than what you're giving yourself. And I really loved that concert. It was beautiful. And I didn't want it to be out of my life for the rest of my life. So I made myself go. I sat in the back. Yeah, I cried. I left a little early, kind of before I'd have to face everybody else who got out of the concert. But nonetheless, it was kind of like a hurrah. Okay, Susan, you put your hand on the burner and you did it. And there's something really, really healthy about that. So remember balance, and that goes on to the next one. Between a balance between all or nothing is another balancing act, and that is people think that keeping busy is the way to get through grief. And from my perspective, keeping too busy is the way to get stuck in grief. I've seen many people in therapy who 10 to 15 years even afterwards are still grieving the death of this loved one because they haven't really done the hard stuff. They haven't really figured out, how do I feel? What have I benefited from this person? How can I say goodbye to this person and appreciate and be grateful for this person? We need to be okay with ourselves and to figure out how we're feeling and what we need or want. And that means we have to have some time without people. And distractions don't help us grieve. They just keep us distracted from facing the hard stuff. So keep a balance, set some grief times. Bob's really makes an impact for people when he says, tell
Well,
about a
yeah,
little bit about personal
yeah,
experience for
yeah.
you.
After my wife died, I didn't study all this. I didn't know it, but what came pretty natural to me was to say, I need to have time that I've committed to doing my grieving. I mean, I will grieve in other ways as well, but every Tuesday night and every Saturday morning were on my schedule. That was grief time. Sometimes I'd be very active, going through stuff up in the attic or everything else, going through all the memorabilia. Other times I'd sit down and put some nice music on and just sit there and cry. But when somebody called and said, hey, do you want to do something Tuesday night with us or Saturday morning? I would simply say, in all honesty, sir, sorry, I already have a commitment. And you don't have to tell anything more. But the point is, I think grieving also has to be not only very intentional, it has to be scheduled. You will grieve all the way through it. But to really focus on your grieving, I think you need to schedule that in a couple times a week at least, so that you can start going through and doing whatever you need to do in order to, to get a grip of it. So,
Okay, now this next one, I'm just going to add, it's not really in your outline, I don't think, but as Bob was talking, it just came to me. And that is, you have our permission at least to do something, but it doesn't have to be all. And I think that when we're looking at the holidays, we start to think about, oh, the holidays, we got out all the decorations, and I have this list of all the people we send cards to, and we go to all these social things, and we have our family over for the day. And we go to this concert with friends, or you have permission to just pick a couple, or not even a couple, or parts of a couple. Holidays have to be in coordination with what you can handle. And it's not doing it all, especially the first year, or probably even the second. It depends how recent your loss was. Grieving is unique in the sense that no two people, even if it's the same role, even if you experience the death of a spouse, it's not the same as what Bob and I went through. A parent, not the same as what we went through. Everybody is different because of personalities, family constellations, lifestyle, life circumstances, who's in the family. I mean, it's your grief. It's your unique grief. So yes, those goals that we're talking about and the things that we're talking about are like a framework, like a recipe, but there's all different kinds of amounts of ingredients in any recipe. And some ingredients aren't really even that necessary. Some people throw in different things. If you know the framework that you have to be active and intentional and use this holiday, even if it is to take down one Christmas box and look through it enough to find, something that you want to put out for the holidays. And then say, that's enough for this year, I'm putting it back. Or maybe you want to get a Charlie Brown Christmas tree, just a little one, just one that you can put on a table. Whatever you decide, but I think also you have to be sensitive if you have young kids or kids at home to say, what shall we do? I don't really feel like this or this or this, but I want to hear yours too. And I'm going to try to at least compromise some. So it can't be totally self-focused. It has to be balanced, but you don't have to send Christmas cards. You don't have to bake zillions of Christmas cookies. You don't have to go out shopping and get gifts for everybody under the tree. You can give a gift card, you can give a check, you can just say, you can give something from the deceased that you think each person might want, if you're ready to do that. So
or you could just not give anything. And somewhere along the line, if you'd like to do that later, you can give a 4th of July gift or
just
something.
say, I'm not ready yet.
Not ready yet to do the other
I just
part.
can't do that. And so hopefully people who love and care about you will understand. Okay, that was just an aside, but I think it's an important aside. There is nothing you have to do this holiday, but the more, I'm not going to even say the more you can do, the better. That if you can do 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 things, or 1 or 2 things, or one thing, wherever you are on your grief journey, choose that. And what we are encouraging you to do is to take a step forward, one step at a time, get you further down the road. So just don't backstep, don't go to bed for the whole holiday. That wouldn't be our recommendation anyway. Try to do one thing that will advance your grief journey. Then the next one has to do with thinking about how you want to handle the empty chair at holidays, the elephant in the room. And maybe most of you've heard that, but I want to just quickly read this because I think it says a lot in not so many words. There's an elephant in the room. It's large and squatting, so it's hard to get around it, yet we squeeze by with it, how are you, and I'm fine, and 1,000 other forms of trivial chatter. We talk about the weather, we talk about work, we talk about everything except the elephant in the room. There's an elephant in the room. We all know it's there. We're thinking about the elephant as we talk together. It is constantly on our minds, for you see, it's a very big elephant. It has hurt us all. But we do not talk about the elephant in the room. Oh, please say his or her name. Oh, please say my loved one's name. Oh, please, let's talk about the elephant in the room. For if we talk about him or her's death, perhaps we can talk about his or her's life. Can I say my loved one's name to you and not have you look away? For if I cannot, then you are leaving me in a room alone with an elephant. Personal experience of me. Ironically, my first husband died in October as well. Yeah. And Thanksgiving came and he had a large family. And I thought it would be a good move to go spend Thanksgiving dinner with them because it was their firstborn son and they They loved him. And I just thought that might be a good move for me to do that. And it might also be comforting. So I accepted the invitation and I went to the home of Rick's parents. He was my first husband, and had dinner and stayed about 3 hours. And I thought that was really good. That was as long as I could take. I got back in the car and I just bawled my eyes out because I felt so disloyal. No one said anything about Rick. No one mentioned his name. No one asked me how I was doing per se related to grief. No one said anything to pay tribute to him or any of that. And I felt so bad. I felt like, what, Susan, you should have said something. And from that day, and that gave me this whole idea that we use with everybody that we speak to, is to really do some planning to introduce the deceased loved one in a family gathering. Because I'm not sure what goes on. I think a lot of assumptions go on. Part of it is, I mean, it wasn't because his family didn't love Rick. I think it's because his family either didn't want to say something about it in front of me because they thought I would just burst into tears, or I don't know if it was like they would burst into tears, or like they shouldn't spoil the mood. The mood wasn't good to begin with. So, I guess I think that as grievers, it's good to think about, what can I do to introduce it so that they understand that it's okay, or I desire it, or I want to talk about Rick. So from then on, I would say, can I bring a candle and do a candle lighting, or would you please include that in a prayer, or I'd like to make Rick's favorite kind of pie, or so. Or sometimes I even say, can we go around the table and just talk about what one memory, can be funny, can be serious, can be whatever. How did that person rub off on you? That's my big famous term. I mean, I think people who at least we meet and have a little time with definitely make a difference. Every person rubs off on us. Every person says or does something that maybe makes some kind of an impact. So at least my word of suggestion to you and recommendation is to be prepared to talk about the person, and to do it fairly soon in the holiday gathering, because it's kind of like getting that in we live on a lake in a little fishing village during the summer, and we go fishing, and the term when you catch your first fish is, good, the skunk's out of the box. And in some ways I think that that's true. Okay, good, the air has been broken. It's like, okay, it's okay if people want to just casually mention somebody during the day, it's okay. None of us, we may be sad, but falling apart by crying is not really falling apart. It's just showing that you love that person and you miss that person. So at any rate, talk about the person and figure out, how are we going to do all the functions that this person who died did before? How are we going to divvy it up, or aren't we going to do those? And then the memorializing, that's what we were just talking about, but finding a way or two to do an act of kindness is also a really good thing to know. Sometimes it feels like I'm the only one that feels like this, and to be very focused, either find somebody else who's in a difficult situation and gift them with something. Or what I did was, Rick had hospice the last 3 or 4 months of his life. So I could work, I had to work full time. I had a daughter that I had to support, and ourselves. And so hospice was a great help to me. And so each one of the hospice workers, I brought over a little plant, Christmas plant, and and a card and with thanks about how much I and Rick also appreciated them, and gifted a stained glass window of the Good Shepherd to the church that we belong to. So, I mean, where maybe that's another approach that you'd like to use. It's kind of a nice way to say, thank you, you made a difference. And that helped me to feel good. Kind of, it was also kind of a sense of closure because I got to go see those people again and thank them.
Well, and I think, I want to return to what I had said earlier as well. There's always, I think, always a deeper meaning to the holiday. There's a lot of jabber in the popular news these days about mindfulness and so forth. But the one thing I think that we need to stress is that you just don't go through a holiday because of the fireworks, or you don't just miss that person who is no longer with you, but there's something deeper about it. It's a time to kind of remember things and to celebrate things and to strengthen one's own faith or hope or reassurance and so on. Let me give you just one little example of that. Susan mentioned that her father lived with us after mom died for 11 years. And he was a World War II veteran in the Navy, and he saw action. And I think for most of his life, it was very difficult for him to even talk about it. But after he and I put a little PowerPoint slide together and took it over to our grandkids' school to talk about it, that began to have him open up. And then he was willing to go in this little fishing village and sit on the trailer behind the tractor that was pulling it in the Memorial Day parade. And that became somewhat emotional for him, especially when you went down and had the wreath getting tossed into the water and so on. And what happened, I think, was that it helped me appreciate not just the fact that Dad had been a World War II veteran, but it's made me appreciate the holiday. I now understand from my own experience a little bit better what that holiday meant. So whatever holiday you're talking about, I think it's important to kind of look at the framework of that holiday, to look at the background, the foundation of it. Where did it all come from? I mean, sure, we all know that the 4th of July celebrates July 4, 1776. How many of you have taken time to read the Constitution, or at least to read the Declaration of Independence? And
probably not now.
Probably not right now while you're reading. No, that's not my assignment. But I think that's also going to trigger what's happening. And is there some way in which that deceased person represented the kind of liberty and the kind of freedom that we have in the United States? How did that come to expression in his or her life? And I think that's a very important thing to do. I think the other thing is that holidays become defined by us as well. That is to say, I list 4 kinds of things: spiritually, culturally, socially, and personally. That is to say, an Easter holiday, for example, for Christians, obviously has a deep spiritual meaning. I'm sure that's true for Jewish people in Hanukkah and for some of the other holidays that they celebrate and so on. So there's something spiritual about that. And I think even in terms of the national holidays like Memorial Day or Labor Day, to say, hey, this world is still under some level of control because these holidays now represent some victories, like Labor Day, the return to civility in the whole labor force, where they got rid of child labor eventually. And Grover Cleveland kind of declared it way back in 1894. But it's also culturally, I'm a first generation American, but my parents were both born in the Netherlands, and there's a whole cultural thing that goes along with that, as it does with the Irish or the Polish or the German or the Far Eastern and so forth. What does that culture say, and how do you celebrate the culture of the person who's been deceased? Socially, in terms of the network of friends, and how does that factor in, and personally and so forth. So So let me just give you what I call the kind of 4 R's of how you can go about making meaning out of the death in this regard, in terms of what, in association with the holiday. Number one, just, reflection or meditation or the journaling thing that we've talked about, to take some time during that holiday day or period at least, not only to journal about the holiday, but to journal about that person's life and how it was affected by the holiday or how they affected the holiday itself. But try to bring those together, because I think that will help enrich your own personal understanding of the holiday. I think it's important to read books. I'd already mentioned the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, for Christians, it would mean reading the Bible, or for the Jewish faith, to read at least the Old Testament, their holy book, to read that, or to read history about it, or to read some biographical stories about it. And then I would really kind of recommend that you try to write a little short biographical paragraph, if not a couple pages, about the deceased person in terms of what this holiday meant to that person and how that came to expression. And you can review the holiday with others. All right, so we've got reflecting, reading, now reviewing the holiday with others. That basically means sitting down and talking about it, maybe at that dinner or whatever else. And the ritual that Susan already talked about, like candle lighting or visiting a favorite place of the deceased, or visiting the cemetery, something of that nature, to keep doing that kind of thing. And that helps bring kind of that, that whole meaning back together again. So I think it's important to kind of try to get a little deeper into the meaning of that holiday, especially in the context of the death of that loved one. So,
And sometimes it's really true that a person is like, I just don't want to celebrate after all of this that we've been talking about. And then I think that if they can at least look at like these holidays, yes, we've made them a way for people to gather and, to express caring, like we're together as a group, we care about each other and we want to celebrate this holiday together. But really, the holiday by itself has meaning.
yes.
I mean, we have, Thanksgiving came to be because we all immigrated to the United States and had a really, really rough journey and time there learning how to plant and to survive. And we were thankful. So the Native Americans and the Americans came together and had this Thanksgiving meal. Good example of united, helping each other out. And then there's Christmas for the spiritual reasons, and I think many of you are probably Christian, and that's really how Christmas came to be. That's why we have Christmas. And yeah, it gets sometimes even kind of clouded by other things. But if you're having a hard time facing the holidays, you might just even go for the heart of the matter, the meaning of it, what the intent was, why we even have Christmas, why we even have Thanksgiving, why we even have a calendar where there's a new year. The one thing that I want to also say about New Year is that that's tough for grieving people. And that kind of caught me off guard, because I wasn't prepared for how different it felt to be now going into this year. It will be 2022. It's a year that your loved one has not seen, not been with you, not experienced with you. And so it's really an indication in most people's minds that they're moving forward into new territory, that yes, they've been in this transition period of grieving, but they're moving into a new year.
Your lifeline is continuing where
Right.
their lifeline ended last year now.
Yes. And I think that's one of the points that I'd like to leave with you. I mean, if you believe theologically or spiritually that we're here for some purposes, where I'm skipping down to perspective and purpose a minute first, is that, that you didn't die. If you're listening to this, you didn't die. Your loved one did. And, I don't know what your theology is about why people die, or why now. I mean, I know the why question is really big, and we're not going there today, although that would definitely be a good and interesting discussion. But if you believe that people are here for reasons, I certainly do. I think that we're not just here for nothing. I think one of the reasons is to learn and to grow and to become wiser for the wear. I think that all of the experiences that we have put together hopefully helps us to mature, to be more purposeful, to understand more about living and to live fully. So you're alive, I think, for reasons. And that you then have a responsibility to, as you develop your new normal, and new normal doesn't mean better. It doesn't mean worse. It means different. Whenever we say something's new, it's different. Now, sometimes it could be better, and it may be better for what you learned going through grief, because I definitely think you will be enlightened and helped and better for the wear. I certainly, as much as I loved each of the people in my life that were gifts to me on loan, that I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to see them die. I didn't want to not have them in my life. But I am better for the wear. They rubbed off, and they also taught me so much about their life as well as their death. So hopefully the same is for you. I think that things happen for reasons and that we can learn from those. So we call them the 4 Ps. Just to summarize, you've been great. I hopefully stuck with us through all this jabber and maybe gained something. I talked about this toolbox at the beginning. I hope you've put a screwdriver and a pliers and a hammer or a few things like that in your toolbox for how are you going to deal with the holidays in a healthy way so that you can take a step forward, so that you can put your hand on the burner and face something tough that you can say, I did it. Doesn't have to be all. Wouldn't be good probably to do it all. You'd be like that efficiency expert who tried to do it all and then didn't feel one whit better. But make a plan. We're at the very, very beginning of the holidays, and then all 3 of them are gonna rush forward. And it can be frenzied. It can be fast. You know that from before your loved one died. You gotta have boundaries. You gotta set expectations and limits. That's what boundaries mean, limits. So plan and prioritize what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that I really wanna do that would make this Thanksgiving, that would make this Christmas, that would make this a new year, that have meaning. Have to be patient with myself. I have to pace myself. I can't do it all, nor would it be good, because if I did it all, I wouldn't be able to sit back and reflect and think, how did that feel? What could I do differently the next time? Because that didn't feel good at all. I didn't like what that person said. How could I respond differently next time? All of that kind of thing. People and privacy, balance. Remember, balance is a very effective, healthy psychological word. Use it a lot. People who are healthy have balance. Perspective and purpose. We talked some about that already, that keep things in perspective. If you can think that you are born alone, you die alone, and you have people gifting your life to be grateful for throughout that process of your life for reasons and to help you learn and grow. I think that's a healthy perspective to try to grab onto and hang on to.
Great. Let me just try to put my arms around this 50 minutes that we just spent with these lovely people.
50, I think it's more.
Well, I've been watching your clock a little too. And,
it's an hour and 20.
An hour and 20. Oh, yes, that's right. My math isn't real good right now. So
right.
Anyway, I think the thing that we want to stress is what Susan introduced very early on in terms of semantics. in dialogue. Holidays can be a challenge. They're not a trouble, all right? They're not going to be, things that are going to overwhelm you. They're a challenge. And know that as you go
They may
in,
overwhelm us.
they may, but just know that you can live through them. And just know that they're only going to be, at least for the day itself, 24 hours long and so forth. And, we talked about having permission to be focused on yourself. That's probably the healthiest thing to do. When you're in a family context, you are part of that family, and the family itself also needs to have some input, but you do that. But just remember, I think this is the biggest thing I want to say. Just remember that there's no time like the present to grieve. Don't run away from it. Don't try to avoid it. One of our favorite phrases is you lean into it. You don't try to do everything at once either, but you lean into your grief, versus avoiding, trying to avoid it. And you don't just overwhelm yourself, you set good boundaries. So it's okay, as Susan said so often, to simply say, I'm not ready to do that. And holiday grieving can help you take those steps forward. And I think that's where we want to end up, by saying, with the triple header coming, you got to be able to say that we're able to move forward, and that I will use this as a part of my grieving process.
Yeah. And we wish you blessings on your journey. We know you'll get through it if you want to. In the end, it's a decision, but you have to do the hard work, and it takes time. So our blessings to you on your own personal grief journey. No matter what role relationship that you lost, we know that person is undoubtedly special to you, and that it will hurt. But remember that it hurts because you attached and loved that person. What better reason could it be for hurt? Our best.
My best. Thank you.